Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Okay, so to be honest, I really hesitated in making this one. The Amazing Spider-Man movies are over. They're done. Buried in the ground alongside Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, the Green Lantern, and Tim Story's Fantastic Four. So why dwell on them? Well, for a few reasons. I think the Amazing Spider-Man movies are pretty interesting actually. They represent an experiment that went wrong, a universe that failed to really take off. They made a lot of money and were seen by millions of people, but they didn't make enough money by the standards of a Spider-Man movie. And now they're just kind of this creative dead end, treated by Sony as if they never happened at all after years of marketing. Maybe I'm just weird, but I find that pretty fascinating, since I think the failures of the studios can often tell us just as much about the film industry as its successes. But instead of just focusing on the movies as a whole, I want to hone in on one aspect of them, Andrew Garfield's performance as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. In many ways, Garfield is the most accomplished actor to have ever played the Webhead. He's the only one with an Oscar nomination for his role in Hacksaw Ridge. He won a Tony this year for his role in Broadway's Angels in America. He co-starred in David Fincher's Social Network and Martin Scorsese's Silence, two of the best movies of the decade, in my opinion. Not to mention smaller, underrated great work like 99 Homes. The guy is a rock-solid actor, obviously. And yet, his Spider-Man, of all three big screen versions, is easily the least beloved. So why is that? That's what I want to dig into in this video, as well as talking about some of the most overused criticisms lobbed at Garfield's Peter Parker. Oh, and before we get into it, if my voice sounds kind of weird this video, it's because I'm feeling kind of sick, so, just letting you know up front.
Change the pardon. Kimi wa naze.
Unfortunately, I think it's almost impossible to talk about the Amazing Spider-Man's Peter Parker without mentioning the word hipster, which I'm very, very tired of, honestly. Hipster is one of those terms like immersion or Mary Sue that the internet has broadly applied to everything and misused so often that it's basically become meaningless. A few years ago, I feel like you could basically call anyone younger and hipper than like Ron Swanson a hipster. Actually, between the mustache and the artisanal woodworking, you could probably get away with calling him one too. I mean, why not? I was always a little confused about what made Garfield's Peter Parker a hipster. A lot of people keep pointing to this goofy scene where he skateboards to Coldplay, which honestly only makes me more confused. Is skateboarding hipster now? Like, were all those guys in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 making fancy craft coffee with locally sourced beans this whole time? And Coldplay has been one of the most successful mainstream soft rock bands in the world for like well over a decade, even when this movie came out, so that doesn't exactly seem like hipster band material to me. So this whole line of criticism always seemed really goofy. At the same time though, I think I can kind of understand what's at the roots of it. Compared to Tobey Maguire before him, there is way more of an effort made to communicate to the audience that hey, this Peter Parker is cool and charming. On one level, I get why they did this, to differentiate itself from the Raimi trilogy, but it's a very tough line to walk with a character who, after all, started out as a neurotic and painfully uncool nerd in the 60s. That's not to say that he always has to be like that. In fact, the Peter Parker of the comics had grown out of that a lot by his college years in the 70s, but that is still one of the core appeals of the character. And they only superficially gesture at it here, with Peter getting bullied in the most cliche ways possible. But you never really get any sense of that anxiety and nervousness that I think is a huge part of Peter, especially at this age. The only time he doesn't come off as really confident and self-assured is when he's talking to Gwen early on. For the rest of the movie, I mean, this guy seems pretty cool. But even that didn't need to be a huge problem, I don't think. It's when you throw Smugness into the equation that this starts to become a character I don't really recognize. Now, Spider-Man has a long history of mocking his enemies. The Vulture is old, the Shocker looks like a guy in a quilt, the Kingpin is overweight. After reading Spider-Man comics for so long, I feel like I could recite played-out Spider-Man-esque jokes about these characters all day long. But humiliating a supervillain actively trying to murder you, and doing the same to a high school classmate who's just kind of a jerk, are kind of not the same thing. I've always hated the basketball scene in Amazing Spider-Man 1, where Peter makes Flash Thompson look like a moron and shatters the backboard of his high school gym's hoop. And it's not because I think there's something inherently wrong with the idea of the scene. Spider-Man has always been a character about growing up, learning from your mistakes, and trying to be a good person, even when it isn't easy or convenient. So using his powers in a really immature way right after he gets them kind of makes sense to me. The problem is in how the scene is presented. There's just something about the smug sense of satisfaction that Peter has in this scene that doesn't feel like Spider-Man at all to me. It's a fairly minor thing, but it really builds over time. Andrew Garfield's Peter can be funny and likable in some scenes, especially playing off of Emma Stone's Gwen, but there's also this real sense of mean-spirited smugness that's kind of hard to shake, especially when the movies themselves often seem to view it as cool and funny, and not as Spider-Man acting kind of like an asshole.
地獄からの使者、スパイダーマン!
But, of course, it's the Amazing Spider-Man 2 that really messes with the character, I think. Unlike a lot of people, I'm kind of okay with Peter breaking his promise to Dennis Leary not to date Gwen anymore. As Gwen says near the start of the second movie, that's not really his choice to make. But Peter's constant back and forth on this issue makes him look selfish at best and kind of stalkerish at worst. In his notes to Sony on Amazing Spider-Man 2, Kevin Feige wrote, "There is too much back and forth with Peter and Gwen. Can Peter be more honorable and definitive and less wishy-washy?" And I think that's some really good advice that obviously Sony didn't follow. If Peter can't live with the guilt of dating Gwen against the wishes of her dying dad, that's okay. But to then have him basically follow her around as Spider-Man, constantly going back and forth on this choice, makes him look pretty bad. And even that, I think, could be okay and even interesting if the screenplay recognized this. But it doesn't. It's all played very straightforwardly romantic. I guess like you would expect from the director of 500 Days of Summer. And that's kind of a problem. In the end, I feel a little bad for Andrew Garfield. I mean, not that bad. He's still a rich, successful actor who gets to star in Scorsese movies. So, I'm not losing sleep over it or anything. Still, he got a raw deal when it came to Spider-Man. He's a great actor, and he seemed to genuinely love the character. I think he was miscast, but honestly only a little. It was the horrible scripts that really did his version of Spidey in. Most of the moments that work in the Amazing films come out of the easy chemistry between him and Stone and the improvisational feeling that they bring to it. But that wasn't enough to overcome some of the most poorly plotted screenplays in Spider-Man movie history. And that's too bad. Garfield was probably never going to be the perfect Peter Parker, but he could have been so much better than this. So I spent a lot of time talking about my problems with Garfield's Spider-Man, but I'll say something positive about it too. I really like how it kept Peter's innate love of learning intact, arguably building on that even more than the Raimi movies. If you can relate, I have a streaming service to recommend, Curiosity Stream. Founded by the same guy as the Discovery Channel, Curiosity Stream is a pretty amazing resource if you love documentaries as much as I do. They have over 2,000 documentaries to choose from, about everything from science, history, tech, and way more. I just watched After Braveheart on it, this really well-shot 2-part documentary series that covers the 700 years or so after William Wallace's death and Scotland's struggle against England. It was really great stuff, especially if you're interested in the real history behind these legendary figures. The best part is that Curiosity Stream is available worldwide and starts at the very reasonable price of $2.99 a month. In fact, you can get 30 days on the service for free just by going to curiositystream.com/CaptainMidnight, which you'll find a link to in the description and pinned comment below. Again, that's curiositystream.com/CaptainMidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.